Good morning, everybody. This is KRFF 95.9 LPFM, broadcasting from the Fargo-Moorhead area, and we are Greener Pastures. We're back after a long delay, and we're going to get right into the show. But first, we have to remind you that this hour of Radio Free Fargo is underwritten by The Aquarium. Coming up at The Aquarium, we have Useful Jenkins on Tuesday, January 16th, which is today. It's a contemporary acoustic jam glass 5-piece, readily tapping into folk, funk, rock, and hip-hop. The doors open at 7, so check out that show.
Right on. Yeah, it's great. It's great to be back after a sort of a Christmas and New Year's season hiatus. Of course, I'm the co-host of Greener Pastures, Jonah Lanto of the Good Talk Network. You can find me on Facebook.com/The Good Talk Network. It's a live and fun podcast, all kinds of interviews, topics, and subjects. And kind of how I met Dave here. And we crossed paths and hooked up over our passionate support of the righteous legalization and logical legislation of cannabis. Mr. Owen, good to be back.
Yeah, it's great to finally be back. Feeling re-energized after Christmas and New Year's, and back in North Dakota to keep getting stuff done.
Yeah, and I like the idea that cannabis unites people. It should not, nor does it, in my experience, divide people, Dave.
No, it doesn't. It's actually pretty good. It's a great way to bring people together. It's a great thing for society, in my opinion. But this show, we're going to kind of do a twist on it, because usually what we do is we kind of talk about the benefits of cannabis. We kind of talk about what's going on in the movement, but we figured for the new year, we're going to discuss some of the common opposition talking points and address those, so that way you're prepared for what comes up and how to address it. Because what they use is they use a sliver of deceit to create they use a sliver of fact to create deceit, to create a false narrative. So we're going to cover that, kind of what they say, what the facts are, and how you can address it.
Yeah, it's a sensible way to approach some of those counterpoints. And, although we're united by cannabis, there are, of course, those who would prefer to divide the movement. And, they're blending of a little bit of truth to kind of spread what could be a false or misleading narrative. It's proven to be an efficient tactic on their part in the past. So speaking of divided opinions and thoughts as relating to cannabis, a new study published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal is calling into question the safety of edibles. And I know through quite a bit of trial and error in processes, even going into Colorado, they've changed how they approach edibles, what kinds of edibles they are allowed to sell to the public. And they've even linked some of the emergency room visits in Colorado are linked to people who have consumed edibles. And so, I think it's a fair starting point to discuss a little bit about the edible industry. Is it safe? Are edibles safe? Are they dangerous? Can you overdose on edibles? These are questions and concerns that people have, Dave.
Right. It is a really interesting question. So let's start with the very beginning. Can you overdose on edibles? No. Can you consume edibles to the point where you're not going to feel good? Yes. But there's a difference between overdose and kind of feeling wonked out. So an overdose is a condition where you have a risk of serious long-term side effects if you don't get immediate medical treatment. So as a result, no, you can't overdose on edibles. What happens traditionally with edibles is there's a delay factor, right? So people are used to smoking marijuana and they're used to feeling it relatively quickly. We're talking 5-10 minutes. And so as a result, they get the effect, and once they get the effect they want, they stop, right? Makes sense. If you're looking to get same thing with alcohol. If you're looking to get slightly buzzed, you may have a shot, or you may have a beer or two, different people. But once you start feeling it, you pull back. The problem with edibles is they have to be digested by your body, which means there's a huge lag time. So what people were doing in the beginning was they were consuming and not getting the feeling. And then, oops, I ate 3 chocolate bars, and when it hit you like a freight train. And as a result, it would feel just unusual, and you'd go to the hospital. And that's what happened.
There is a drastic difference in how your body or you get high. Ingesting cannabis through smoking it in any form, it's taking an almost instantaneous effect. And you understand what's happening to you or with you as it happens, and a great point there. Whereas with an edible, you're running into situations where people just eat too many for their own good. It's quite frankly, and it leads to people feeling very anxious and a increase in heart rate, or maybe even vomiting. Right? These are some examples of for somebody who has eaten too many edibles or gone too far with the edibles. Who oh my God, they panic and they check themselves into the emergency room, and because they've never felt like that before.
Right.
It's uncomfortable. It's disorienting. Fact is, if you just lay there or sit down and let yourself melt into the couch for a little bit, you're going to be fine after a little while. You don't need an expensive ER visit, and I'm not telling people to avoid, seeking a doctor if they feel unwell. But the reality is that, as you said, with an overdose, there is long-term risk of danger and health risk to your person. Whereas, feeling anxious and wonky and weird and vomiting from an edible, well, if you eat too many or your body wasn't ready for that, these are normal. You're not dying.
Yeah, and
I don't want to laugh at anybody, but I've seen people who maybe took one too many edibles and were kind of in a place where they didn't expect to land themselves.
Yeah, and the other thing about edibles that people don't remember is you're consuming a food product, right? So basically, what happens is if you're on an empty stomach, it's going to hit you a lot quicker. But let's say you just went out to Buffalo Wild Wings and had dinner, okay? And then you go try and eat the edible. It's going to take 2 hours to kick in. So you're going to go, oh, it must be a weak edible, and just munch. Well, shoot. Oops. And that's why labeling is super important on these products. So the number one thing you want to tell people is, look, we have to make sure that the edibles have a labeled dose on them. And once you have the labeled dose, that's when you can really move forward. The other thing that people don't expect is the recommended dose is only 10 milligrams of THC. The average brownie, for example, can have up to 100 milligrams of THC. So you have to make sure you're only eating a small amount.
To sell 100 milligram brownies in most of the legal states, to my knowledge. Like they've sort of legislated that a single dose of an edible or consumable has to follow, very certain and very strict guidelines.
Correct. It's now 10 milligrams per dose in Colorado and Washington for recreational, 30 for medicinal. But back in the day,
I don't even think they let it. Yeah, in some places like Oregon, for example,
5.
I'm pretty sure you can't buy over-the-counter edibles in Oregon.
Right.
It's only flower. Yeah, and the study that a lot of people, as opponents of legalized cannabis always want to find some sort of grim truth. And a lot of these there are people, I've seen it in social media. They're like, oh, well, look at all these emergency room visits related to marijuana. People are taking marijuana and then going to the ER and they're getting sick and it's bad. And that, I think that result is totally skewed. You're talking about in a society where previously people going to the ER or to the doctor for a visit, for a health check, didn't feel safe telling their doctor that they were using cannabis because it was illegal. So number one, in that change of reporting or the supposed rise in marijuana use and hospital visits, I think at least part of that can be attributed to the fact that people are now willing to tell their doctor or to tell a physician, yeah, I used cannabis yesterday or today or this morning or whatever. I don't know that you can directly correlate it all. But one study that came out from Colorado did find that 10%, so 10% of pot-related emergency room visits in Colorado were caused by edibles. And what the telling number here is that edibles make up only 0.32% of total sales. So, whoa, I mean, there is caution to be had for anyone using edibles. Even if you're a regular smoker who, you feel like you smoke cannabis regularly, or you've done it, weekly or whatever, you should still approach edibles with caution.
Yeah, I mean, edibles are not a silver bullet for marijuana legalization by any means. The other thing that they'll always bring up with edibles is, quote unquote, whether or not they appeal to children. And that's why you've got to stress that the legalization bill that's currently on the table is going to ban children from ever entering the dispensary, step one. Step two, they're going to be in child tamper-proof packaging, which means a child can't get into it. Step three, if the parent has over a certain amount, they have to put it in a place that's not child accessible. If it's over a larger amount, it has to be under a lock of some description. And then step four, it's a plain white box that has the exact labeling, so it's not going to look appealing to children. And last but by no means least, step five, it's not going to be in the form of children's candy like gummies and all that. So we have taken a bunch of steps to address their second concern, which is edibles in children and children getting their hands on it. Now, I don't think there was this huge case of children getting their hands on edibles in the first place, but that is something that they always like to bring up as a potential risk. And so you have to explain how legalization is mitigating that risk.
What about the children? We have to save the children. Yeah,
it always comes up
for everything.
And look, they're right. I don't want a 5-year-old eating edibles. I don't think that's a hot take. But I'm also a responsible adult.
No, really, what it comes back to, and I'm not, as somebody supportive of cannabis legalization as well as edibles, I'm not afraid to say that edibles do have a risk associated with them. Is this risk dire or emergent or dangerous? No, but there is a risk, and people need to be aware of. But there's that same risk with alcohol. There's that same risk with tobacco. There's that same risk with the Vicodin your doctor gives you when you break your ankle, so on and so forth. There are very few drugs that we can take, over-the-counter, prescribed, or otherwise, Dave, that come risk-free. There's no such thing as a drug that is risk-free.
Well, there's no such thing as a thing that's risk-free. Even water will kill you if you drink enough of it.
Take it a step further, by all means.
But I will say, there's one thing you said there that I kind of don't like, and I kind of do like. I do like that you admit that there's risk, and that's something that we have to be honest about. I don't like saying there is the same risk as there is with alcohol or opioids or those.
So comparable to other drugs. I mean, there's going to be a risk if you're taking a drug, over the counter, prescribed or otherwise. There are risks associated with that. Period.
And the question is always, what are those risks? How do we mitigate those risks? And are those risks severe enough that we need to regulate it or do something about it? And the answer for mitigation, start low, go slow. Understand how long it's going to take to kick in, between 30 minutes and 2 hours. If you don't feel anything after 2 hours, yeah, you're probably fine to take another one. But give it up to 2 hours. So that's your time frame. And then just make sure that you know what you're actually consuming. Also, one of the things that I like now is a lot of chocolate bars are stamping the dose on the squares themselves, which is another big help in case people are bad at math.
Sure. Well, yeah, and edibles have been approached by many people in the cannabis community as very wonderful. You have a lot of people who don't want to smoke, they don't like to smoke, and you've got this sort of wonder drug in a cannabis edible that enhances your mood. Oftentimes, for people with anxiety or depression, it really helps them. It also, it's been associated with being able to, with healthier sleep patterns, and you can sleep better. And really, they kind of take this study a little bit further, but people with depression or who have been diagnosed with depression are more likely to use cannabis edibles.
Yeah, and I think that's...
Find them, yeah.
I think that's actually a segue into our next point, which is the famous psychosis study. that everyone brings up. But before we get into that, I think now would be a good time to pause for a read real quick, and that way we can talk about the psychosis thing and that concern, because they always bring it up. So,
Absolutely.
As a reminder, this hour of programming on KRFF 95.9 LPFM is being underwritten by Redemption Ink and Glass, Fargo's first glass shop. Redemption Ink offers a variety of CBD products, as well as having 2 tattoo parlors. They're open late, 7 days a week. Redemption Ink is located at 2512 7th Avenue South.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks to them for their support of Radio Free Fargo. And it's great being on the show. Once again, I'm Jonah Lanto of the Good Talk Network. You can catch us weekly on Facebook.com/The Good Talk Network. We're now producing a live late-night TV show. Be on the lookout for that. We've sold out a few performances here in Minot, North Dakota, and we'll be looking to expand that offering in 2020. It's Good Night Minot, really popular social segment called If Businesses Had Tinder has been taken off for us. So we'd love to have people check that out. But as Dave said here, we're discussing the potential, the suggestion by a handful of studies that frequent use of cannabis, marijuana, is associated with a higher risk of psychosis. And before we go any further, what is psychosis? Quite simply, psychosis is when someone loses touch with reality. And the study that we're kind of talking about here was published in the Lancet Psychiatry, and it again suggests that consuming pot on a daily basis, and especially using high-potency cannabis, increases the odds of having a psychotic episode later.
So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get out there very quickly what the sample size is and where it was done. So we had a sample size of about 900 people between 18 and 64, and it was through 11 cities, and it was all people who had a psychotic episode in that period of time. So 5-year study, 2010 to 2015, all across Europe, about 900 people. So first off, the sample size is solid. That's fair. That's about a good sample size. That's a margin of error of 3 to 5%. So in terms of their sample size, we have good methodology. Where we have problematic methodology is kind of hearing the music between the notes. So one of the biggest issues with medical marijuana and this psychosis claim is, what was medical marijuana primarily marketed to treat? Medical marijuana was primarily marketed as a mental health alternative for people suffering from depression, anxiety, PTSD, or other neurological symptoms like nerve pain, chronic pain, the such. It's designed to target mental illnesses in a way. I think that's a fair statement. So when there's a product that is designed to treat people with mental illness, of course, that population is going to have a higher likelihood of mental illness. I mean, that's not surprising, right? If I told you that people who have psychosis tend to have mental illness, it's kind of a truism. Yes, the floor is made of floor, to quote the internet. So that's the first thing, right? The second thing is, a lot of people who are using medical marijuana are inherently skeptical to some degree of medical professionals, especially back then. In 2010, 2011, 2012, when it wasn't mainstream, so to speak, medical marijuana was perceived as like a, trying to think of the word for it, not holistic, but alternative medicine, I think is what I'll call it. And it was mostly people who didn't believe in conventional Western medicine. So it was likely people who already had mental issues and were not seeing a doctor for them. They instead chose to use medical cannabis instead of going through conventional Western medicine. And that is another thing that I think is telling. The third thing is the correlation between a higher dose and a higher likelihood of a psychotic break. Now, other medicines actually have this. I don't know if you've ever seen the commercials for antidepressants. Have you seen them on TV, Jonah?
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I have.
Yeah, and you know one of the things they say, right? Side effects may include, and they list a whole bunch of them, and the one that always catches people off guard is suicide, and thoughts of depression and increased anxiety. They always list that as a side effect of mental health medications. So it goes to reason, the more of it you take, the more of a side effect you're going to experience, right? That's common sense. If I have one Coke, I'm going to experience a lot less of a caffeine effect than if I have 10. So when you increase the dose, obviously you're going to increase the severity of whatever side effect you're experiencing. And also, if you're taking a higher dose, it means you have greater symptoms in the first place. Someone doesn't take a large dose to address their symptoms if they don't have severe symptoms. So you're taking a correlation that is almost a wet pavement causes rain effect in my eyes. It's people who already had undiagnosed mental issues, who were seeking something to treat their mental issues, who were then taking large doses because they needed it to address their mental issues, and then their mental issues manifested one day. That's not surprising to me.
Yeah, another major critique of this study that is of course being trumpeted by the anti-cannabis movement is the data does not link or prove actual causality. And you're talking about a study period. Now, as you mentioned, they have a good control group. Sure, they do. But you know what? They have nothing about the lives of these people prior to the time in which they began studying them. So you're talking about a 5-year study, and you hear, oh yeah, a 5-year study. That sounds great, right? It sounds like they covered all this time. But when you're trying to link a psychotic episode or an episode of psychosis, of losing touch with reality over this 5-year period, without establishing anything about the psychology of these people prior to that time frame, and that's absolutely critical when you're making the link, or you want to make the suggestion that marijuana use is linked to psychosis, but you're not taking us through the life of these people. You have no genetics linked to this. A lot of the key factors that I would want to see in a peer-reviewed study that is proven and that we can rely on. I want to see genetics. I want to see history. A 5-year span is not enough to prove anything. You can make a correlation, but that's it. You can't prove causality, and that's a big deal.
And
you can't say cannabis causes psychosis. The data does not support that.
And that's not just our interpretation of the data, by the way. That's the interpretation of the addiction researcher and psychiatrist at Columbia University. So for the record, that's not just Dave and Jonah, who don't have medical degrees, saying that. That's a doctor at one of the top medical schools in the country, Columbia, who specializes in psychiatry and addiction issues, saying that this study is not, her exact quote is, "You cannot say that cannabis causes psychosis. It's simply not supported by the data." And then there's another professor, Liz Dahl, who's fairly prolific, who agrees, and she's also saying the same things that Jonah is saying. So you don't have to hear it from us and just trust us. These are PhDs, these are MDs, very respected people who are saying this warrants a future study, but this is not sufficient to prove a causation. And that's
you're not gonna start smoking weed on a regular basis and then become schizophrenic or bipolar because you started smoking cannabis. It's just simply not. It's not there.
And also, what's interesting to me when I read this study is, for those who started using it at 15 or younger, you're not seeing an increase in risk, really, of these psychotic episodes. And medicine that causes permanent damage is much more effective as the body is developing. The classic example of this is it's why pregnant women can't take specific medications, because their impact, if it's going to have negative side effects and negative permanent damage, it's going to be more severe when you are younger and those parts of your body are developing. So that is another knock, for me at least, that really goes against the argument that you are having, that it's causing it. And I think that's a place where people don't necessarily look.
Yeah, I agree. And what we do know about psychotic disorders, that, first and foremost, genetics play the largest role in psychotic disorders. Secondly, is your home life, your environment, is the second most direct factor attributed to any association with a psychotic disorder. It goes on to point out these doctors who are sort of offering their counterpoints to we'll call it the almost absurd conclusion that you're going to get psychosis from smoking too much high potency cannabis, is the fact that children who have a high risk of schizophrenia that grow up in stable homes, many of them go on to not develop schizophrenia. So it really is bypassing this study, bypassing a lot of the consistent factors that medical research has applied to people with psychotic disorders.
Right, and that's something that people just tend to overlook. It's basically that this is a big nothing burger right now. Now, do I support further research here? Absolutely. And is the U.S. government doing further research? Yes, they are. They're doing it slower than we'd like, but they are doing more research, and that's good. We want to know the facts as much as we can. But right now, what the facts show is we're not seeing an increase in psychosis in the United States itself.
No. Yeah.
We are unfortunately seeing research being slowed, and I think that's another thing that we need to talk about, and that's kind of a great segue into the next thing, is the opposition always has claimed that this used to be their biggest argument. We want more research. I'm sure you remember this. It was, the facts aren't out there. Let's research and settle the facts. And sadly now, they are enhancing their effort to stop the research and stop the facts, which is very concerning.
Well, it is very concerning. It's frustrating. And the fact is, progress on medical cannabis research in the United States has stalled. We are well behind other prominent nations who don't have the just horrific and absurd scheduling status on these drugs as we do in the United States. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, Dave, as we've already done and discussed the scheduling status and its effects on cannabis in this country of marijuana currently being a Schedule I substance. What that means is that you can't even, without strict approval of the DEA and the federal government, you can't even study cannabis. And so much to the point that there's only one official government grow facility. Where is it at?
It's in Mississippi.
It's in Mississippi. So we have one government-approved farm for cannabis at the University of Mississippi that grows pot for research purposes. Now, we have a company, and this is just one example of many, but we have a company in the United States right now, biopharmaceutical research company, California-based, founded by a former Navy SEAL, a man by the name of George Hodgen. He had to legally import a small quantity of marijuana from international companies because of our absurd laws and restrictions against researching cannabis or acquiring cannabis for the purpose of scientific research in the United States. This, in spite of the fact that 33 states have approved cannabis for medical use with another 11 for recreational use. David, it's so hard for me as just a everyday tax-paying citizen of the United States to wrap my head around the lack of logic in this process.
Yeah, my attitude is I want more research. I agree. if you want more research, contact the DEA. Also, quick plug, youtube.com, search Legalize ND. If you want to see our scheduling show, it's up there. We go for about 20 minutes on that if you're a little confused. All the shows are on YouTube now, so it's a great way to get past content, because sometimes these episodes do get referential. But here's how bad it is, all right? The deadline, you could apply for these as early as the beginning of January for these research permits, right? And the deadline was December 20th of this year to get your permits for 2020. So the government had, in theory, 11-ish months to process these requests. And and they did not get back to anybody. The DEA did not get back to a single researcher who wanted to obtain product from state legal dispensaries in 11 months. So I'm going to quote
this year.
Yeah. I'm going to quote Senator Schatz. He's a Democrat from Hawaii, if you care. And he kind of sums it up better than I could. This is another ominous sign that this administration opposes not just rescheduling or descheduling or decriminalization, but anything that has to do with cannabis. They're fighting it. And I think that succinctly sums up our complaint about we want more research people. Then let us do research.
It's a facade.
Yeah. 11 months and not one.
What that is, like let's unpackage that statement. We want more research. Really what they're saying is we have established a bureaucratic maze full of booby traps. And if you can somehow, by the grace of God, navigate your way through this maze of bureaucracy and traps, on the other side of that, you might get a research approval. You don't even get a guarantee, and that's all that is. It's a bureaucratic roadblock. It's a maze. It's a red herring. You know, it's fool's gold, because they're not in it. And really, the suggestion from the DEA, from the Drug Enforcement Administration, telling people they're willing to allow more medical research. Well, that dates back to 2016, where they invited applications in. So going back now 4 years, and we still have little to no progress.
Yeah, their answer is either buy it from the small farm in Mississippi or literally import it from Mexico. Which you used to not be able to do.
Canada was used. I think that the Netherlands was used by another company, but
yeah,
it's ridiculous.
So when someone says we want more research, you can very honestly say to them, no, you don't. You may claim,
show me what you've done to want more research. Show me a bill you supported, because right now there are,
couple dozen
has in its power right now the ability to pass marijuana research legislation, and people want to see that in 2020. Will we see it? I don't know. There's so much partisanship right now in this country that even bipartisan bills are getting stalled on the Senate floor. And this is not an attack on any administration. This is to me a call to action for any American citizen who cares. There are bills, not just Democrat bills, but bills supported by Republicans and Democrats, that are sitting there collecting dust on the desk of Mitch McConnell and other Republicans controlling the Senate, simply as a power play. So we're talking spending bills. We're talking about things that would help the American public. We're talking about things that help our police forces. Like, the list goes on. And they're just getting stalled out because they're playing, the Democrats versus Republicans political game that the rest of us are suffering from right now, and nothing is getting accomplished.
And I don't just want to shoot at Republicans. I do want to shoot at Democrats real quick, because what Democrats will frequently do is they will take a marijuana bill and they will amend it in the House to the point where they basically remove all the bipartisan stuff and add a whole bunch of junk to it. And as a result, when they add all this stuff, and you can argue whether it's good or bad policy, by junk I mean politically infeasible, they intentionally go and add things that Republicans won't support to create this divide. And it's getting worse, this gimmick that each side uses to change and play with bills to the point where they're not even really recognizable anymore. So it is both parties doing it. On the Senate side, it is the Republicans. On the House side, it's the Democrats kind of asking for too much, in my opinion. But yeah, the reality is, folks, it's 2020 now. We've got people running for president. You've got people running to get reelected in the House. You got people running for reelection in the Senate. Nothing's going to get done. It's 2020. They are literally not going to do anything that will rock the boat, so to speak, or that will give the other team a win. And it's sad that they view it as giving the other team a win, but nowadays it feels more like we're playing football than politics. There's a team, and you got to be part of the team, and you can't let the other team get anything. It's disgusting.
Yeah, and that precisely my point that we find ourselves in a situation politically where very few of our representatives are working for the people, and they're working for their party, and no matter it's partisanship. It's flawed right now. It's a flawed system that is not getting the job done for a lot of the sensible policies that the American people and taxpayers want to see. And it's highlighted pretty strongly by the support of cannabis legislation. And we've got prominent presidential candidates, at least on the Democratic side, who have said it's a priority to them to legalize cannabis. Now, they don't talk about it too much. It's not a platform by which they want to bolster their campaign, because as we previously established on the show, there's not a lot of donor money in that, so they don't spend a lot of time talking about it. But if you look at a lot of these candidates, for them, that is something that they want to accomplish. We have several states. It's worth pointing out. We have governors now. And this is something I like to see, and some people might look at it as an overstep, but if it looks like it's the will of the people, then let's bypass the bureaucracy and just have a governor who is willing to legalize cannabis for his state, for the betterment of his people. One such example is current New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. He's pledged to the people of New York that he will legalize adult use marijuana in his state this year. We're also seeing similar movement in Kansas. Kansas Governor Laura Kelly said that the two most important goals for the year: expand Medicaid, and the other one, medical marijuana legalization. So I know we probably got another read here, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts on governors wielding a little bit more power to make cannabis legalize cannabis. Is that the right move, or would you prefer to see it work its way through the people and the House of Representatives and the legislature?
Oh God, that's a loaded question. Is it the right? It's one of those things where it's the right thing to do, but the wrong way to do it. You know my politics. I'm fairly reserved about it in the public space, but you know my politics a little bit more than most. Sometimes doing the right thing the wrong way is dangerous, because what doing the right thing the wrong way does in the future is removes the checks and balances that stop you from doing the wrong thing the wrong way. And I think there's a much greater societal risk of using, because what you're talking about is governor executive orders, essentially. That's essentially what it is. That's not what it's called, but that's what it is.
In a nutshell, fair to say that, yeah.
And my concern is, if you give people the power to do things unilaterally that you like, you are giving them the power to unilaterally do things you don't like. And we need to look no further than the federal government for executive orders. Because, and I'll pick on the Democrats here because I don't want to join the crowd of always picking on the Republicans, but the FDR, the internment camps where we literally imprisoned Japanese people exclusively because they were Japanese, was through executive order. And the reason FDR had that power was because of Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln used it to do some things like free the slaves. Great thing. Great thing. The Emancipation Proclamation. Great thing, objectively speaking. But the same thing that gave Abraham Lincoln the power to emancipate the slaves gave FDR the power to imprison people because of their race. And that makes me very afraid.
Oof, yeah, that is a stark contrast, my friend, and it's well said, and that's something that we need to reflect on. Now, can these governors work to legalize it without a vote, but through the channels of their legislative body?
Well, it's not done through the legislative body if it doesn't come to a vote. And that's the problem. The way that they're trying to do it is
as opposed to not a vote of the people, but a vote of the legislature.
Yes, I wish that the legislatures were voting on this. They punt a lot. Look at New Jersey. New Jersey is the archetypal example of a legislature that couldn't figure out how to get it done. They had literally everyone allegedly on board for, I think it was rec. I can't remember. It was either medical or rec, and it just died. Dead as disco.
Well, wasn't that when they had Chris Christie in there, and he was a renowned.
No, I'm talking right now. I'm talking like a year ago.
Okay.
Chris has been gone for 4 some odd years. But we have to do this read. So, sorry to stop it. I know it's a great discussion. We have to do our read real quick. This hour of music on KRFF 95.9 LPFM is being underwritten by Orange Records. Orange Records offers a variety of new and used music on vinyl and CD, as well as a large selection of posters, DVDs, and more. Orange Records is located at 641 First Ave North in downtown Fargo and is open Tuesday through Saturday, 12 to 6 p.m. Search Orange Records Fargo on Facebook for updates on new arrivals. Thank you guys, Orange Records, for supporting us. They're a good record store.
Yeah, fantastic. Appreciate the support of Greenwood Pastures Radio. Just kind of, we're getting toward the end of our time here, Dave, but coming back around to the idea of a governor's order, and it brings, I guess it brings us to a point where in North Dakota, for example, or in many states, we'll look at many states that publicly, the public support for legalized cannabis on a nationwide level, depending on what poll you're looking at, most polls put it around 2/3 support by the United States population in these polls. So 2/3 of the country supports regulating cannabis in a fair way, supports, no longer imprisoning people for possession and use of cannabis. But the problem is, and I know it comes back to what we were talking about, the problem I have is that legislative bodies move slowly, and they don't always work in the best interest of the people so much as they work in the best interest of special interests.
Yeah, well, welcome.
And that's what forces our hand. If you look at South Dakota right now, they're facing the same issue, according to many people in South Dakota. They've got a voting population that support legalizing and regulating and taxing cannabis for adults. I feel like we have the same thing here in North Dakota, but elected officials are not taking action to implement the will of the people. So it comes back to people like yourself, like me, and others who are sponsors of the bill and people who are collecting signatures to take action and allow voters to decide. And, I appreciate the vote. I appreciate the petitioning and the balloting process. But some of these things, I would really just like to see them get hardlined, greenlit, and progress moving forward.
By the way, quick question. Since you brought up the petition, I feel like we should talk about that really quickly. It's out there. We have a ton of business partners on board that you can sign. Currently, we're a little soft on the western part of the state. So if people are looking to do it in Minot, Basically, we're still a little shy there. We're working on building out Minot. Every other of the major 4 cities has a place where you can go sign. Check out the website, legalizend2020.com, to find out where you can sign the petition. And remember, if you signed a petition before early December, you have not signed the statutory petition. And I think that's kind of important for people to know.
Yeah, get out there and sign your petitions, folks. If you are a supporter, share these episodes, share the petition, tell your friends and family. I think this needs to be a movement where people who want to see a signed petition, for people who want to see cannabis get legalized, get out there and sign, and get your friends and family to do the same. Make it a point. If you're a business in any of our major cities who would be willing to house a petition for people to come in and sign, contact Dave Owen, contact Legalize ND, and let them know, hey, we'd like to have a petition here. What do we got to do? Because the process is pretty simple to be somebody who is gathering signatures. It's not complicated.
No, it just requires a desire to go do it. I guess that's kind of a good place to end at. As always, we always end with a song. I think it was is it your turn or my turn? I'm going to say it's your turn.
Your turn. It's your turn. Do you want it to be my turn?
Yeah, because I didn't think about it.
Yeah, because I didn't think about it. Well, we're going to go with the 9 to 5ers anthem by Aesop Rock. For all you folks out there working that 9 to 5, trying to chase the American dream, this one's for you. The 9 to 5ers anthem by Aesop Rock.
Coming up next is the Do-Gooders, and thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon. To the